Hi, welcome back to another video. So today we're going to be looking at the face. We're going to be going back to the anatomy series. Last week I was going to have out a video, but I got back later than I expected from Boston. And so, yeah, I was just tired, so I didn't have a video last week. But yeah, we're back to the anatomy series as normal. So yeah, today we're going to be looking at the face, and the first thing to understand when it comes to the face is just the structure of the skull. So when drawing the skull, it's important to think about key shapes and key landmarks. So essentially when drawing the skull, you have the spherical structure, so just drawing like a circle, and then what you can imagine is like a cone, but then part of it's cut off, and that cone is what sits underneath this spherical shape here. So yeah, let's put that into practice and I'll give you some of the bone landmarks. Yeah, we're just gonna start with that circle shape, and I'm gonna draw this from more of like a 3-point perspective. So we start with a circle shape. The next thing you want to do is find your center line. So just follow along with me, because the image isn't gonna be right in front of you. So yeah, I'm just drawing a center line here. Now I'm going to find a place where I want to put the bottom of the chin, and I just do a little hatch to represent where to stop. Now we're going to talk about like the key landmarks. Essentially what we want to do is we want to draw like a center line through this circle, and that will represent where our eyebrows are, and it gives us an understanding of where the eye sockets are going to go, where the nasal cavity is going to go. And so one of the most important things for drawing the face are these landmarks here. So the eye sockets 1 and 2, the nasal cavity, and then you're also gonna have like this small shape here next to the maxilla, which is the upper part of your mouth that goes down into your upper teeth, and the mandible, which is the lower half, which is where like the chin is, and that goes into the bottom half of your teeth. And so we can take this kind of landmark where you have eye socket, nasal cavity, and then 2 cavities either side of the maxilla. We can take that kind of shape and place it over the structure that we have there. So yeah, let's go about doing that. So I'm just gonna sketch in roughly, I'm gonna do 2 circles roughly where the eye sockets are, and I can shape those out a bit more. We're gonna do a circle for where the nose cavity is, the nasal cavity, and then we can do a small circle that indicates where that cavity is next to the maxilla. Okay, so now on the edge of the skull, wherever you have like an eye socket that's on the edge, you're always gonna have this kind of shape where it comes in and then comes back out. So I'm just gonna do that here, where it's gonna come in and then it's gonna come back out, and afterwards that comes back in and that folds down into the mandible. No, not the mandible, the maxilla. And so you're gonna have this kind of shape like this at the edge of your skull. And what you can do is you can bring that all the way across to that area where we drew or indicated like a small circle for the cavity next to the maxilla. And we're just gonna fold over that cavity like that. And you can see how it's starting to take shape. Whenever you have the upper half of the skull, you can imagine it a bit like a cap or a helmet, because you're gonna have this visor like shape. I'm just drawing it really crudely, but where it goes in, comes back out, and then it's going to come back in and fold across. So that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to draw it coming back in, and then we're just going to follow the structure of the skull. Another tip actually is not to be afraid to deviate from the initial lines that you put down, because the initial lines that you put down are just guidelines to help you follow along to what you're doing, but they're not your definitive lines that you're going to follow. Essentially, when you're putting more pressure on your pencil, you're making decisions as to which lines you're going to follow. So here I'm just emphasizing the eye sockets. Yeah, those are our eye sockets there and there. And then we can just draw that nasal cavity as well. You can think about the nasal cavity a bit like a diamond shape. So this is what it's gonna look like, but in this sense, it's more like that diamond shape is being squished like that. So that's our nasal cavity there. Depending on whether the face is front facing or a 3/4 or a side facing will change the way that looks. So if it's front facing, it might look like more like a potato, kind of like that. If it's side facing, then we're going to get that squished diamond shape like this. And so that's what we've got here. Also, if it's from the side, usually what happens is, or what happens is part of the nasal cavity covers where the eye socket is, or partially where your eye socket is, like that. And then let's say you have your other eye socket there, and that's what's happening here. So yeah, essentially we've got our main landmarks out now. So eye sockets, nasal cavity, the socket next to the maxilla. Now there's another thing that I like to put out there, which is the zygomatic arch. And that's just right next to the eye socket where you're able to see the side of the face. If it's a front on thing, then you know, maybe you can kind of see it, kinda, but not as pronounced. So essentially the shape that we're gonna follow is more like a free. You're gonna draw like a free, and then it's gonna come back out like that. And so one of those parts is gonna be bigger, then you're gonna have a smaller part, and then that's just gonna come back out like that. And then right underneath, you're gonna have this part that just follows that. So this is the zygomatic arch. This is where your ear is gonna sit. Now I'm just gonna measure downwards from where the maxilla stopped. And this is gonna be where we're putting our chin. Now usually whenever you draw the chin on the skull, if it's from the side, it's gonna look a bit more like this, where it comes in, comes back out, and then yeah, it folds round like that. If it's more of a straight on view, then you're not gonna have those kinds of bumps. So I'm just drawing the maxilla. Now the maxilla is going to come back up at like the midway point. So what you want to do on that circular shape, if you draw like a midway point, that will give you an idea. If you draw a midway line, that will give you an idea of where to attach the maxilla, the mandible back up to the zygomatic arch and the maxilla. And then yeah, we're just going to draw a small cavity there. And that's our skull. We've got our eye sockets, so I'm just going to shade in. Nasal cavity, maxilla, mandible, zygomatic arch. And those are the main things that you want to keep in mind when drawing the skull. So let's just label that out. So we're going to label everything out. So down here, mandible, up here we've got the maxilla, and don't worry if you can't remember the names. It's not always about remembering the names, it's more about remembering the shapes. The names help to communicate what you're drawing, but the shapes are probably the most important thing, unless you're in like the medical profession or something. So mandible, maxilla, nasal, because that's the nasal cavity. Just above the eye sockets is where we have our frontal. That's your frontal bone. These aren't as important in terms of, what do you call it, landmarks, like the frontal, the temporal, which is the back half. Unless you're specifically drawing skulls, but this is specifically about faces. And then you've got the peripiteal, which is like the side part. wait, no. I mean, peripatale's probably the back half, and temporal is like that place just to the side of the zygomatic arch. So let's label that as well. So this here, zygomatic arch. And then if you want, you can label the eye sockets, but I'm not going to. So essentially that is our skull shape. Mandible, maxilla, nasal bone, frontalis or the frontal bone, temporal, which just sits just above the zygomatic arch to the side of the eye socket, and then the peripatale, which is at the back. And then at the very back half at the bottom, you have the occipital bone. But that's not as important because you're not really gonna draw that out when doing faces. But those are the main bones that you need to know. So yeah, let's do another 2 skulls to get you guys familiar with drawing the skull. So now we're gonna try the side-on view. And so a lot of the time whenever I'm drawing those circles, I'm just doing like a circle motion and then I put my pencil to the page. So we're gonna find our center line. Wait, I'm gonna do it this way instead. So center line, that's our center line. We can draw across the middle to find where our eyebrows are gonna go. Think about halfway in that circle and just measure down. That's gonna be where our mandible attaches to. And then all we're gonna do is we're just gonna cut off that part there. And we might have to change the measurements, we'll see how it goes. So we're gonna use that same sort of shape here for that eye socket. We're just gonna go underneath where that eyebrow is. And we're gonna use that same shape where it comes in and then comes back out. Now from the side, you're gonna have the nasal cavity. Nasal cavity is gonna look a bit more like this, where it's fairly thin. More like that, fairly thin. Now you remember like the visor sort of thing, or the helmet sort of thing, when you get to the eyebrow? Because when you get to the eyebrow you have this ridge, comes back in, and then it just folds back over like that. So I'm just going to draw that in here, where it's coming back in, and then it's just going to fold back over like that. Now I'm just going to draw in the other eye socket. So whenever you think of the eyes, it's always going to be like 3 eyes apart. So 1 eye here, space, same spacing, and then the next eye there. Because this is distorted because it's a side view, this can go closer than you'd expect. So I'm just going to draw it here. So that's our other eye socket right there. And we can follow the same sort of principles. To the side of the eye socket, the zygomatic arch, so we think about that long free shape where the first part of the curve is larger, second curve is smaller, and that's just going to come backwards to that. Now underneath that you're going to have a curve that folds downwards and goes down into the maxilla. Now from the side view, the maxilla is going to point outwards slightly, so I'm just going to communicate that. There's our maxilla, there's our zygomatic arch. Just going to crack that up a bit. And hopefully you guys are following along and I'm not moving too quickly. And it does take time to learn, and yeah, my honest recommendation is actually get to grips with drawing skulls, and that will make when you draw faces a whole lot easier. So yeah, the zygomatic arch, maxilla here. You remember that cavity shape where you have 1, 2, cavity, nasal, cavity. So we're going to have a similar sort of thing here where draw that cavity in. We're just going to go down into our mandible. Now remember, from a side view, in, back out, like that. So that's all I'm doing there. And so we've got our eye sockets here and here, nasal butt cavity right here, maxilla, mandible, and then just to the side we're just going to do this as we follow down. We're going to draw out from where the mandible is. It's going to come slightly down, going to draw a small ridge, come across, and then it's just going to come back up like this. And there's our skull from a side view. So let's just shade those parts in. And we can label what those parts are. So yeah. Frontal, this area here, the temporal, that area there, zygomatic arch, this right here, mandible, above that, the maxilla, nasal, where the nose is going to sit, and like those are the main ones, those are the main landmarks you need to know. Yeah, so let's try this one. Same thing again, circle, draw your middle line, draw roughly where do you think the chin's gonna sit. Now whenever you draw from the front side, what you want to imagine is that you're not drawing from the very edge of that circle, you're gonna come slightly in and you're just going to measure down like that. And now what we want to do is we want to find that middle line, which is where our eyebrows are. And then we can actually, then we have room to draw the rest of the things in. So we can draw like a rough circle for where the eye sockets are going to sit. We can draw a rough circle for where our nasal cavity is going to be, and then 2 rough circles for where the maxilla goes down into the mandible. Now either side of the eye sockets we're going to have the same sort of thing, where it comes in and then comes back out. And it's going to fall down kind of like that. So we're just going to put the same sort of shape on the other side as well. And because we're seeing more of this side, yeah, we're going to have a wider space here. So that's that cavity there. Now that we've done where the eye sockets are, let's just draw the eye sockets in. Like that. And then just going to draw the other one in. Like that. Gonna draw a nasal cavity. You can think about that diamond shape, but it's more wider at the bottom. And now either side of those 2 parts that are open, next to the maxilla, we're just going to draw a cross. So I'm going to draw it coming down, going a bit wide, and then it's just going to spread outwards like this. So you can just reflect that on the other side like that. Okay, now either side of where that bone comes out and then comes back in, we're just going to draw the mandible. And you kind of have to eyeball it out a bit because it's not fully widespread, it's shrinks in. So that's what we're gonna do. And we can darken the cavities, so here and here. Darken nasal cavity, darken the eye sockets. And then you remember the zygomatic arch? You're just going to draw that in as well. See, like from the front side it's not really as pronounced, it's just alluded to. Now all we're going to do is draw the rest of the skull. Like that. And that's our skull from the front side. Yeah, we we could improve this a bit. We could, 1 second, like that. And then if you want, you can do like the teeth. Or hint at it like that and do like a spinal cord. And essentially that's like the front half of the skull, and we can label that again just for repetition's sake, and also so that you get a clear idea of where the different things are from the different perspectives. So zygomatic arch, which is this thing. Mandible, maxilla, nasal, frontal, and then yeah, if you want you could put temporal, but that's pretty much all you're gonna see. So that's the skull. That's the basis of what we build off. So let's move on to drawing some faces now. And I just recommend following along with me. So we're going to draw a few different perspectives. So we're going to start off with like a 3/4 side view. Start with that circle. Find a center line. I'm gonna draw roughly where does that chin finish. I'm gonna think about, okay, so halfway that's our eyebrows and then halfway is roughly, and technically this is 3/4, so it's not exact. I guess it would more be here is where, yeah, the edge of that is gonna go. So that gives us the basis to build off now. So just where the eyebrows are, we're gonna measure and do that shape here, which represents that eye socket. And that's coming back in like this. Now, one thing that I kind of learned from Chris Hong is that you can think of the shapes as a whole. So from where the eyebrow sits, draw the entire shape of where your eye is going to sit, like this, and then you draw in your eyes. So gonna find where our eyebrow sits. I'm gonna just draw out roughly the whole shape like that, and then we're just gonna draw in roughly where actually is that eye. Same thing again, but what we're gonna do here is, if you remember back when I was speaking, when it comes to eyes, think of them in thirds. One eye, the space of an eye, but not actually drawing an eye, and then that allows you to find where the next eye is. So we're just gonna measure this space, measure roughly the same distance, and that's gonna give us where our other eye actually is. And we're just gonna draw in roughly like the overall shape. It's more about thinking in big shapes. Where that eye is. Okay. So yeah, let's sketch in the nose, where the nose is. So if you have your eye line here, just slightly underneath where the eyebrows are, in between the chin and that eye line is where your nose is gonna go. So we're just gonna put our nose in here, and then the same thing applies for where your mouth goes. So from the nose down to the chin, halfway is where your mouth is gonna go. So let's just sketch in where those I guess irises are. Like that. Because this is mostly in shadow in the image, I'm just gonna draw out where the shadow is and shade that in like that. And then to me, this mouth needs to come down a bit to like here. Maybe the chin will have to come down. So this is the thing. Whenever you're doing like your guidelines, it's not necessarily definitive. It's just a guide for where things should go. So mouth line, the bottom half. The bottom half, we're actually just gonna do a shadow like this. It depends on how you want to do things, but for a male, I normally just draw like a shadowed lip. I don't draw the whole pronounced thing. So that's what we're gonna do for the mouth. Measure like a small circle down, that finds you like the bottom half of the chin. There's our chin. It's gonna come back round, and that's just following this mandible shape here, although it's more smooth because you've got skin overlapping where the skull is. We can pronounce those eyebrows a bit. Like that, and then this one. Like that. Then to the side, we can think about that like zygomatic arch, and our ear is gonna go like roughly here. So like the ear, it depends on like the angle of the head. Usually it's like the top half of the eyes and where the nose is. But I recommend, from whatever drawing that you're doing, measure relationships and proportions. So measure across from the ear, what does it intersect with? So if I measure on my drawing across from where the ear is, it intersects with like the lower half of the eye. So here, and then if I do the same sort of thing, intersects with like the lower half of where that nose is. And so let's just put the ear in right here. And for ears, this is what I normally do. I normally do this kind of curve, and then I'll draw a second curve that comes around like that. That's what I normally do for ears. So I'll just show you that. So you do that small curve, you draw a second curve that comes around like that. And then if you want, you can shade that in like that. So there's our ear. Now, in terms of the neck, it's never right up against the face, it's like slightly to the side of that. So if it was to be up against the face, it would be here, but because it's slightly to the side, giving it space, we're gonna draw a neck here. And then the other half of the neck, and I recommend the same sort of thing where you measure up from the neck. What does it intersect with? So in this, it's more like this area here it intersects with, so I'm just going to draw down from there. Can curve that round, and then when it comes to hair, it's the same sort of thing. Don't think of it individually, think of it as like a whole or as a group. So find where your hairline is, or where you think the hairline is. Here, I'm just going to draw like a rough thing that comes around like this. So you see, I found the hairline here, drew out the rough estimate of the shape, and now we're going to think about like the overall shape. So find the midpoint where all the hair is coming out from. So I'd say the midpoint on my image is here. So they're just going to draw hair coming out from there. We're going to curve round from there. And because it comes slightly over where the ear is, I'm going to do it like that. Yeah, and that's pretty much our face. We've got our face. We can sketch in those irises, we can put in the rest, which is more just clothing. I probably won't put in the rest. I might communicate some of it. And then you can shade it, but we'll look at values and shading in another video. This is more just teaching you how to get the face structure and the things around it. So that's a 3/4 perspective. So front on face, same sort of start. Circle, find your center line, find where your chin is. And if you remember the skull, remember that, okay, things aren't exactly right up against where the edge of that circle is. It's slightly inward. I'm just copying that here. So yeah, that's our overall shape that I'm starting off with. Find the middle of that circle. That gives us where our eyebrows are. And then the next thing that I do is I measure that eye socket shape. So usually what you're going to see is you're going to see like a shadow, and then you're going to see the curve of where that eye starts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure that out as a whole, including where the top of the eyebrow starts. So let's just do that here. Gonna measure like this, gonna measure like this, include the bottom half of the eye, and I'm gonna come up like that. And think about it again. One eye across, a whole eye across, and that will give you where the other one is. And because you can't see, in this image I can't really see where like the eyebrow is, I'm just gonna do the bottom half of where stuff sits. So I get a rough sort of thing like this, which communicates the eye sockets. So now I can draw like a through line through that, measure down halfway from that through line, get where our nose is, measure halfway down from the nose, get like where our mouth is. And now's where you have a bit more free reign, I guess. And you don't have to follow along with the stuff that I'm doing, but if you do, it gives a basis for you to start working on sketching off your own images. So I'm just going to measure that down. Now here at the edge of the face, there's like a part which communicates that cheek shape here, more similar to this, where you've got the maxilla going down into the mandible. So I'm just going to sketch that in here, and I recommend again and again, use your eyes, think, measure across. So the part where it comes to more of a point is slightly above the bottom half of the nose, and then it's going to come in slightly, and it's going to come out, and then it's going to come round and down into the mandible. So that's what I've drawn there. I can I guess I could do the same for the other half, but I think I'll sketch in some of the features first. So just gonna find where I think the upper half of the eyelid is sitting on that side, and then I'm gonna find it on this side. Where's that upper half of the eyelid? Gonna draw in like what do you call it, iris? Just gonna come across like that, come across like that. Can shade that in. Can shade that in. Like that, cool. Now let's do the nose. Honestly, for the nose, I just think about the nose as a whole. So squint, if you squint, you're gonna get the shadows. That's essentially a lot of values. So squinted, I'm just gonna do like a shadow shape for the nose. I'm not even gonna communicate it that much. Okay, so now I'm gonna do the other half of the face. So I'm gonna look at like the hair, and I'm just gonna measure across slightly. And then on this half we've got more of the face that we're seeing. It also does a similar thing where it kind of does this, resembling that part where the maxilla comes down into the mandible. So I'm just going to communicate that here, where we come slightly in, come slightly out, and then connect back in to the chin. And then ears, measure across, see what it intersects with. It intersects with the bottom half of like the iris. Gonna do that. Intersects with more or less where the top half of the lips are in this one. So it kind of changes from person to person. That's why it's important to measure. Otherwise you lose the likeness. Another measurement you can do is where does the corner of the eyes, no, where does the corner of the mouth line up with if I measure upwards? So I've measured, it kind of lines up with that, like where the iris is. Measure up. It's more the corner of this where that measures up with, so yeah, measure up, measure up. For this I'm gonna do same sort of thing I normally do for males, where I kind of learnt this from Keenan Lafferty, where essentially with males, just make the upper lip a shadow and then do a shadow underneath that. Now essentially what we can do is we can find roughly where that hairline is. So that's roughly where I think it is. I can draw in that ear as well. Should have drawn that in earlier. And then we can do the same sort of thing where we do that small curve and then a big arc that comes round. And all I'm going to do is put that in shadow like that. That gives us our ear. Now for this hairstyle, because you can't really see the hairline in this hairstyle, what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and find where does the hair come out from. So it's roughly here, and then we're just going to draw around the end and think about like the overall shape. So that's what I'm going to focus on here. The overall shape. Not thinking about individual strands. Overall shape. Side of the ear, and it comes back around like that. And then in this, we can't see like a hairline. And this, so I'm going to rub that out. And I'm going to follow along to what the image is telling me. Yeah, more curves like that, and can do small, yeah, like that. And then let's just get our eyebrow in. It's like the upper half of that. So you just put that eyebrow in. Like that. And then on this side we can't see it, so this needs to be a bit lower than it is. like that. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to find where that neck is. Remember, it doesn't sit right up against, slightly to the side. I measure up from the neck and see where does it intersect. So here it's more like this, so I'm going to do that. And then we can just quickly roughly draw in some sort of closed shape like that. But yeah, you can see that gives us our face. Yeah, so hopefully that's helpful in terms of communicating how to draw faces, how to approach it. And yeah, put it into practice in your own time. Get some faces on Pinterest, sketch them out. If you're really eager, try doing the 100 heads challenge. That's something that will really help you when drawing faces. And don't be disappointed if your faces suck at first, because everyone starts from somewhere. I can show you guys like some of my old faces, I guess. Yeah, so this used to be like old faces, old drawings, old things. Yeah, like that. And so you can see it's come a long way, or it's come some ways from where I was. And so don't be disappointed if your initial faces and your initial drawings aren't what you thought they would be, because you'll improve over time.